Welcome back to the Holistic Health Bites podcast. Today, we're going to talk a lot about the overall endocrine system or overall hormones and how insulin resistance and insulin sensitivity all play into that. And I am joined today by Dr. RitaMarie. Thank you so much for joining.
I'm so glad to be here. Thank you for inviting me.
Yeah, absolutely. This is going to be a lot of fun. So, you obviously do a lot of things. You've been in this field for a very long time, both teaching practitioners and working with clients and just all the things. So, can you just do a brief introduction and tell everybody about you?
Sure. I have been in practice for over 30 years. I think it's probably going on 32, 33, something like that. Got into the whole holistic space back, in the 1990s, early 1990s, when there was no internet and there was, a lot of people didn't know about this. So, and I did it because of my own health challenges. And over the years, I have developed strategies, and one of my big passions is helping people reverse insulin resistance because, well, first of all, know that they have insulin resistance. And I have a term I call pre-insulin resistance for the people who don't know they have it. They're not medically diagnosable, but they're on that path, and we have a way for them to identify. So we help people to identify if they're on that path, reverse it, and then, move on to whatever life has for them. Some people we work with that way, and they're like, everything's cured. Okay, all of a sudden their Hashimoto's goes away, and all of a sudden their autoimmune gut condition goes away. And for others, there's more work that needs to be done. So it's really a customized approach to health and nutrition. So I got into it because of my own health challenges. I found out when doctors kept giving me medication after medication after medication, I started to do some research on my own and figured out that I ate poorly, thought poorly, did a lot of things poorly, had a lot of exposures, cleaned up my act, cleaned up my diet, cleaned up my mindset, did a cleanse, did a fast back in the day before it was considered normal to fast on a regular basis. And I've been fasting for 38 years. And I've done extended fasts, short fasts, et cetera, et cetera. And I've been doing it and teaching about it ever since.
Oh, I love it. All the things. Yes. And I think, just like you said, it has to be customized. It has to work for you. It has to be based on your history, where you are right now, where you want to go, all the things. And yeah, so I definitely want to dive into some fasting information because I think there's a lot of misconceptions around how to fast, when is it good, when is it bad, who should do it, who shouldn't do it, all the things. So I think that could be a great topic. And then, of course, just all the things that led to all of our health issues, some of the mistakes we were making, whether we knew they weren't so good or things we thought we were actually doing right that actually are not serving us. So I think we have a ton to talk about. So can we just back up a little bit and just give like a foundation for like, what is the endocrine system? What are these hormones? What do we even mean when we're saying that?
Yeah, I think about the endocrine system as the master control system. So every tissue in your body, every hormone, every gland, every organ, whatever, is controlled by hormones. Every single one. Like, you can't think of any. Thyroid hormone controls, there's receptors for thyroid hormone on every cell in the body. There's receptors for insulin on every cell in the body, right? And then there's others that might be a little bit more specialized, but they basically, the endocrine system, the hormone system, is a system where we have release from one source, a chemical messenger that travels around and tells other tissues in the body what to do, what to produce, how to produce other hormones. There's some, like in the pituitary and hypothalamus, that tell the other organs or tell the other hormone glands what hormones to produce or how to produce and when to produce. So it's basically everything's controlled by it. People think of sex when they think of hormones, or they think of thyroid. I mean, that's basically where it goes with people. But your heart is controlled by hormones, your kidneys are controlled by hormones, your immune system, your brain, everything is controlled by hormones. So it's a master control system.
Yeah. And insulin is one of those primary hormones that we really do need to pay attention to. And yet so many of us, so many in the population think that that really only relates to diabetes. And
Yes.
I think we think of it as a medication because we know of people who have to take insulin injections, but there's so much more to it. And it has so much more to do with a million things, not just diabetes. So can we dive into
Everyday
insulin
health. I
specifically?
mean, if we don't have enough or we have too much insulin, your health is compromised.
Yeah.
Everyone's health is compromised. It's not just if you're diabetic. It's not just if you have diabetes in your family. And so many people are right on that precipice of having problems before they're even diagnosed, because we can go on for days about the shortcomings of the traditional medical system or conventional medical system in measuring for insulin resistance, pre-insulin resistance, which is those stages that nobody's talking about. And that's what I help people to do. If you got diabetes, you know how long that stuff's been out of balance? What, 20, 30, 40, 50 years even? And all the damaging things that happen when people are diabetic, neuropathies, retinopathies, nephropathies, heart problems, high blood pressure, all that stuff has been silently brewing for decades. But nobody intervenes until you're over the threshold into where lots of damage has been done in your body. And that's what people like you and I are trying to stop.
Yeah. So let's define some of those conditions. Like type 2 diabetes, I think most people are pretty familiar with, but we can start with that and then kind of work backwards in the progression to like the pre-insulin resistant stages.
All that stuff. Exactly. And I have a really cool chart. People love it. You know, it shows diabetes over here, but the spectrum of disorders that are leading up there. So we have diabetes, full-blown diabetes. Your blood sugar fasting is usually over 120, 125, depending on who you talk to, on 3 consecutive occasions, which, by the way, might be 6 months apart because most people don't go to their doctors every other day. So I teach people how to measure their own glucose at home. So it's been that way. It's been going on for a long time, and it's really damaging. Insulin resistance and metabolic syndrome. So let's define the difference between those. Insulin resistance is a state where the body's producing plenty of insulin, too much insulin, and the cells basically, hands over their ears, say, no more, no more, no more. We don't want to be damaged by all that insulin. And then what happens is the sugar sits in the blood and builds up to dangerous levels. Generally in medicine, it's above 100. So if your blood sugar is 100 fasting, then you're considered insulin resistant. Metabolic syndrome is insulin resistance combined with lipid abnormalities, blood pressure abnormalities, high cholesterol, high LDLs, low HDLs, high triglycerides. And then usually people are found to be in that situation and put on medications. And a lot of times they just ignore the insulin resistance part because they're not diabetic yet. They're just metabolic syndrome.
And there's no medication to lower the insulin.
They don't have a medication for that, right? That's diet, lifestyle factors that we can easily control. It's choices. Every day, people get to make choices all day long, right? And if you make the right choices, you go down the path towards health and happiness. And if you make the wrong choices, you're in the doctor's office every couple of weeks trying to get a new medication for whatever new ails you. So we have diabetes type 2, we have insulin resistance coupled with the fat abnormalities or metabolic syndrome. Oftentimes it's considered a later stage of insulin resistance if it's metabolic syndrome, but not always, because sometimes those metabolic changes precede the actual blood glucose being high, and the high glucose and the high insulin actually contribute to those metabolic changes, right? So we need to step in a lot earlier. And, you know, studies recently have shown that 93% of the population is metabolically unwell. 93%, take that number in. If you're sitting there going, oh, I wonder if I am, chances are pretty good you are, right? Chances are pretty good that what we're talking about affects you. And do you want to find out after you're diabetic and maybe the eyes are starting to go and you've got neuropathies, or do you want to find out decades before and prevent yourself ever from going there? That's the stand I take with it, because it's too dangerous to go there. Once you've gone there, there's a lot of damage. We've had people who are not even diabetic yet, right? That's the key word. You go to the doctor and they go, oh, you're not diabetic yet. I don't need to run your A1C. No, I don't need to yet. Well, do you want to wait for me to become?
Right.
Or do you want to just find out earlier so I can make changes and avoid this? So that's where I come from and why I'm so you can tell passionate about this, but why I'm so passionate about it. And what we do is we intervene early on. So before the blood sugar goes above 100, everybody's like, you're fine. You go into the doctor's office, it's fasting blood sugar is 98. You're fine. No, you're not. No, you're not. It should be in the low 80s, right? there's some studies that show that for every time it goes above, a little bit above and a little bit above and a little bit above 90, there's an increased risk of cardiovascular disease, increased risk of heart attack, stroke, those sorts of things. So is that where you want to be, or do you want to catch it earlier? But you can't go by just fasting glucose, right? So the people in that stage where their fasting glucose might be either perfectly normal or starting to inch up, and their postprandial glucose, the glucose that's after eating, is going up. That's the stage I call pre-insulin resistance, right? You're still in danger. And it's a place that, great, let's catch it now before too much damage is done. Because once you're diabetic, there's a lot of damage done and it takes a little longer. Although I've seen diabetics turn it around within a couple of weeks, right? Couple of weeks. So that's the stages. And I was starting to say earlier, we've had people come in and their feet are tingly and they're numb and they're feeling this, and they've read about it, and they go to the doctor and say, is this related to diabetes? And they go, you don't have diabetes yet. And it turned out they did have retinopathies. Yep. And this one person I'm thinking about had those situations happening. And they went in and got his A1C at a health fair because the doctor wouldn't run it. It was 10. It should be 5.
Yep.
So he was having huge spikes and then huge dips to balance it out so that in the morning his blood sugar was just 98. He fell through the cracks. He's not alone. A lot of people are falling through the cracks.
Yep. And insulin is actually the first one that gets dysregulated, and no one's even looking at that.
Nobody looks at that until you're even type 2 diabetics. They don't run that on regularly. Nope. They run it on type 1 because they want to see if they're regulating their insulin intake. Seriously?
And I have a client right now who was diagnosed as type 2 by his medical team. He was on all the different drugs, including insulin, has tried all the things over the years. And they really never even looked at those values. And when I ran his labs, he actually has low insulin. He's not a type 2.
So he's not a type 2. I've had that happen.
Type 2.
He's a latent autoimmune.
Yep.
And then you run the antibodies to show and it's a different way to approach it too, because you have to treat that as an autoimmune condition, not just a blood sugar dysregulation condition.
Yep. But it's so important to know what's actually going on instead of just guessing you have high blood sugar, you're type 2. No, there's a lot of things that could be going wrong here. We have to look at the full picture. We can't just hyper focus on one number.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And then even before that, I see it as things that start to happen when you're a little kid. If you were the type of kid that would go out and play, but you had to come in every couple of hours and grab some food, that's a sign that your insulin levels are too high and your blood sugar is probably going too low. That's what happens early on. People are told as adults, hey, you have hypoglycemia. Your blood sugar is too low. In reality, when we start testing either with a glucometer or a CGM, we find that those periods where they feel like their glucose is actually high because it's in the blood, not in the tissue.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah. Or it was really, really high and it's crashing. It's still too high. Still too high, but it's crashed from 200 to 120.
And then you feel
a big drop. Yeah. So they feel all the hypoglycemic symptoms, even though they're not actually hypo.
That's a hyperinsulinemia thing that nobody's really looking for. Yeah.
Yeah. There's so many things. And I think I'd love to dive in a little bit from what other things you've learned from glucometers and CGMs. These are my favorite tools ever because they give you real-time feedback about what's going on in your body and the choices that you're making and how those are actually serving you. So what are some of the things that either you've learned through using these tools or you've seen your clients have learned when they see their data and they can associate it directly to what they're doing?
Absolutely. And seeing the data is critical. And I started out when I started really teaching this in masses. I always taught it to my patients one-on-one. It's about 12, 13 years ago, maybe. And we started to do this and get people to get a glucometer and measure their glucose. And it was hard. It's a hard sell because they're measuring it a lot because you want to catch their peaks. You want to see how high it goes. So I had them testing before they ate and then every 15 minutes until it went back down to baseline. And what we found was that those surprises, so that was one of the big surprises. Somebody said to me, oh my God, I had one of those hypoglycemic spells and I tested my blood glucose and it was 200. And all I ate was some raisins on the salad that I've been eating all along that didn't do anything to my blood sugar. And we're like, okay, some people are very sensitive to sugars, not even refined sugars, raisins, pineapple, apples, grapes, pears, blueberries even, which are people whose blood sugar goes up too high after eating blueberries, right? So they find out like, oh my God, I had no idea that I've been eating that food my whole life. I had no idea it was causing the blood sugar spikes. We have people who find, oh, every time I talk to my, you name it, person on the phone, my blood sugar goes up. Like, duh, stress, right? Cortisol raises blood glucose. We find people who can find their sweet spot of exercising because they find out that certain times they go out. If they do like a walk around the block, their glucose is high, it goes nice and down, the body uses it. But if they go out and do really intense exercise, then sometimes the blood sugar goes way high. And that's because the body's releasing stores, is not enough in the blood. So they find out so much and it helps them to actually make the changes I would have told them to make anyway. But it also helps me to see those fine tuning, like, oh, you can eat pineapple, but you can't eat mango. You can eat this much pineapple, but not this much pineapple, right? If you eat your tortillas, you have to have your tortilla with a big salad. Otherwise, all kinds of great stuff. So it helps us to really fine tune the diet and not have people have to go off of everything. I mean, I take people off of sugar. Everybody gets off of sugar, agave, maple syrup, all that stuff, because that's going to shoot it up regardless. And it's not good for you anyway. But, if somebody can get away with this much, well, I don't know, blueberries, right? They can eat this much blueberries, but if they eat a whole bowl of blueberries, their sugar goes up. Okay, you're going to have to be fine with just eating a small amount. You don't have to give it up completely. So it teaches me how to help people to eat right, to exercise right, to think right, lack of sleep, right? All kinds of stuff it teaches them about.
Yep. And I think that's the beauty of being able to use these technologies that we have available to us today is we can really personalize it.
Yes.
I mean, random things you would never think would spike some people, like tomatoes, are incredibly big spikers for some people. Or tomato sauces. I mean, it just varies.
Sauces
but
for sure. Cooked tomatoes for a lot of people.
Yeah.
Right. Raw tomatoes, maybe not.
Right.
But yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
The concentrated stuff. And so, I think there's so many things that we can then personalize. And it's like, well, I don't want to give up my blueberries. All right, well, let's see what we can combine them with.
Exactly.
That maybe will blunt that response a little bit. Like some almond butter or some, some other protein source or something. Like there's so many games.
Are the best.
Yeah.
People want to give the fat, but there's some indications that the fat with sugars is not so good.
Right.
But the greens are loaded with fiber and all kinds of phytonutrients that help the insulin get into the cells with the sugar. So, I really help them to do that exactly, combine. But I really have found that the greens are the best. Greens.
Yeah, I love that. So tell us a little bit about how insulin directly correlates to all the other hormones in the body. How does it play a role in whether it be sex hormones or thyroid or, whatever other hormone is in the body? How does insulin really have an impact in that?
Yeah. So to understand some of that, there's a lot of ways, but you have to understand the concept of insulin resistance. So insulin resistance is that the insulin can't get into the cells. There's plenty of insulin to deal with the blood sugar, but the cells have blunted the entry, closed the door to the entryway. What it turns out is that insulin also closes the door on cells to other hormones, and it can lead to thyroid receptor resistance, progesterone resistance, estrogen resistance. So when you get those resistances going, because people have symptoms of low levels of the hormone, but when you test their blood, the level's high, right? Like, so a diabetic who has insulin resistance versus a type 1, they have symptoms of high blood sugar. They have symptoms, actually, a lot of them of low blood sugar because it's all in the blood and it's not getting in. Same thing with thyroid. Some people have symptoms of low thyroid, but you test them and their thyroid numbers look fine. But it's all in the blood and not getting into the cells and into the nucleus of the cells where it needs to take action. So that's one way. It directly affects thyroid by affecting levels of TSH, by affecting the conversion from T4 to T3. Right? So all of these things make a difference in it. And insulin can lead to inflammation, and cytokine release affects the hormone receptor function in just about every one of them. There's so many ways. I mean, it affects the gut. It affects, in fact, some of the medications these days now are working on that effect in the gut, the glucagon-like peptides that get produced in the gut. So there's so many places. And if you don't get insulin balanced, it's really hard to get the rest of them balanced.
Yeah.
It really is.
So is that your approach then? If you find someone who is having these thyroid issues, but their thyroid levels look fine, so clearly it's a receptor issue and things just aren't getting into the cell where they need to go, is that your first place you start, is trying to lower the insulin and kind of repairing the insulin resistance?
I have a pyramid of approach. So somebody comes in with symptoms. The typical medical approach is, this is the symptom, let's test to see, and let's give you something. A lot of folks who go into functional medicine will do the same thinking set. Oh, this is what's the symptoms. Let's just say hot flashes, for example. You're having hot flashes, and we're going to test your estrogen, progesterone, all the balance. And if they're out of balance, we're going to give you bioidentical hormones, or we're going to give you, black cohosh or any of a number of herbs that might affect that. But you've got to ask the question, why? Why? And what I find is the two things at the base of the pyramid, I think of it as a pyramid. The base of the pyramid are gut and insulin. And everybody comes in no matter what. We check to see if insulin problems are an issue. In fact, in my big programs, no matter what they're coming in for, everybody gets a CGM because we want to see what's going on for them. And they're always surprised, especially if they have an autoimmune disease.
Yep.
And thyroid, especially, all of those things are related. So yeah, we always look at insulin. There's not a single person I would not look at it. You start with the basic blood test. Okay, your fasting glucose was 87. Great. Let's get an A1C and let's get a fasting insulin. Oh, those look good too. All right, let's just get you to test your postprandial, right? Let's just get you to test. If they don't want to do a CGM, let's do, test it at 45 minutes after a meal. Just let's see where it's going. If it's going high, then we go in further and deeper. So yeah, I start there with everybody. It's part of what I do as part of a thorough evaluation.
Yeah, it's so foundational, and nothing else will work if you don't get that stuff lined out first.
It won't.
I find the same exact thing. So what are some of the foods that you then have people lean into? If you figure out that they do have insulin resistance, they've got all of these underlying problems that we've been talking about, what are some of the things that you have them either remove or prioritize in their life?
Yeah, so it's both. I like to start with ads because people tend to be, although I've had recently a couple of people who are more prone to takeaways and having trouble with the ads, but usually people are, okay, I want you to add green leafy vegetables. I want you to add these foods rich in omega-3 fats. I want you to add, more fiber-rich, phytochemical rich foods to your diet. And then I have a worksheet. It's like a 6-page sheet that has just all these different foods that help restore insulin sensitivity, right? And it tells you why. And so I have them just pick a couple of these a day and add these to your diet, right? I will then say, okay, let's take things away. And usually I'm doing some very specific testing to see where things are at. And I used to go in and have people do their ads and takeaways, and then we start testing. And what I found is that they're already getting such good results that they go, oh, I don't have a problem with this. And then they go back and do the stuff that they were doing before. So now I say, don't change anything in my group program. Don't change anything for the first 2 weeks. Get your meter and let's measure and see what you're doing. If you're typically having jelly beans for lunch, I want you to eat jelly beans for lunch. And they're like, okay, I want to see what your food is doing. And they go, oh, I had no idea. Oh, I just thought whole wheat bread was okay. I thought, or gluten-free, whatever, quinoa bread was okay, except for the shooting your levels of sugar up. So we test that early on. What do we take away? Well, we take away the obvious, the refined sugar, but also all of the sugars that are taken away from their fiber constituents. So maple syrup, honey, agave nectar, you name it, anything that's a refined sugar, we take away. We take away flour because flour tends to move them up, and we have them test. So we have them take it out and then put it back in. I do a 30-day reset to help them to stay away from everything that raises it, and then see what they could add back in moderation. Some things, but certain things are red. I say, don't ever add these back. It's just not a good thing to do for your overall health. Yeah, so we take away those things. We add in things like chia seeds and flax seeds and walnuts and good sources of omega-3s. If people eat animal products, fish, being careful where they get it from. We add those things in to give them a good balance, but we're taking away the salami and the bologna and the processed meats and the mayonnaise and all the hydrogenated heated oils. We're taking those things away, but I like to give them things to replace it with.
Yeah. Yeah. I think there's definitely a balance between, we have to make sure we're getting all the essentials that we actually have to survive.
Right.
But we do have to remove the offending foods.
Yeah,
I mean, there are things that are directly causing these problems, and no amount of supplements or amazing food is going to overcome the things that are directly causing harm. So we definitely need both sides of that. So I think that's great. What about some things that are maybe not food related, but all the other lifestyle things?
I look at a 5-point thing. We have to have consistently good nutrition. We have to have consistent movement, whatever that is appropriate for you. Some people it's running, some people it's walking, some people it's, doing sit-ups or push-ups. Some people it's just dancing in their living room, and whatever it might be, whatever your level of fitness, you have to be moving consistently every day, because that's going to lower the response, increase the sensitivity of those cells. So if you have a muscle cell that's untrained versus trained, the trained muscle cell is going to be much more insulin sensitive. So we make sure they're getting the movement. We make sure that their stress is addressed, because cortisol raises blood sugar. So we do some things, whether it's tapping or heart math or yoga, meditation, whatever their favorite, whatever the practitioner's favorite thing to do and to teach. You teach, because they have to get that level of stress down. I love that people are doing all the wearables, right? And now the Oura Ring even tells you your stress level. So you can look and go, okay, oh, let me meditate, let me get it down. Because they know that if that's going up, they're going to see a shift. And people who are doing both, like an Oura Ring and a CGM, they see the correlations as well. So that's important. The one that people don't like so much is sleep. Because everybody's like, well, I'm just going to stay up and get a lot of done. And it's like the badge of courage and the badge of honor. And I was like that. That was my biggest problem. Now I'm in bed by 9:30, 10 o'clock every night. That's it. Sorry, it's past my bedtime. I got to go.
Yep.
Because it's so important, because you're healthy. You don't have any signs of insulin resistance, pre-insulin resistance, anything. But you have one night of bad sleep, like baby that kept you awake, you're going to be insulin resistant the next day. So a tip I tell people, if you had a bad night of sleep and you normally don't eat high glycemic foods the next day. Give your body a break.
Yeah. Which is extra hard to do when you're sleep deprived. You're going to have way more cravings and way less inhibitions.
Ghrelin, ghrelin goes up, leptin goes down. You're like, just give me food. And of course you're not craving broccoli,
right? And you also don't have the energy to make a whole meal and all the things. So you have all these factors that are working against you when you're sleep deprived. And it's just the worst possible scenario to be in.
Absolutely.
For sure.
And the last thing I teach them is the timing, because people have been taught over the years, especially people who are trying to lose weight, eat every 2 hours to keep your blood sugar steady. It's the worst thing you can do, 4 to 6 minimally, right? Now, you can't necessarily, if you have to eat every 2 hours because of how your body feels, you have to slowly increase that. We've had people who tried going from that to 6 hours, and they're like having heart palpitations and they're getting sweaty because their body's going into stress response. So just everything we do, we just ease our bodies into it. And when we can make those changes, life goes on. We have people reverse their insulin resistance in no time. We've had people reverse insulin resistance, Hashimoto's, hypertension, and who knows what else was going on with them in like 3-4 months. They're completely gone at age 65, right? like somebody who's 22 and you go, oh, they're more resilient. No, right? So
Yeah.
it happens when you take charge and you make changes and you make choices that affect your body in a positive way. It a lot of times it happens really fast.
Yeah. So that reminded me, we were going to talk a little bit about fasting. So I do want to circle back to that because I think it's such a big, important topic that people are either scared of it or obsessed with it. And there's a happy way in the middle where it's a healthy thing. It's not an obsessed thing. So how do you approach the topic of fasting with your clients?
There's lots of different kinds of fasting, right? There's what people are calling intermittent fasting, which is really time restricted eating. You're eating within a certain window and fasting within a window. We have to realize that healing happens in the fasted state, nourishment and buildup happens in the fed state, and we need a balance between them. Unfortunately, people are eating right up until bedtime. They're eating first thing in the morning. Some of them are getting up in the middle of the night and going to the kitchen and getting a snack. And we need to give the body a break. We need, I think, at least a 12-hour break at night. I don't even consider that fasting. I just think of that as good sleep hygiene, good overall. Have your last meal at 8, have your first meal at 8. That's 12 hours. That shouldn't be a big deal. We want to leave the 3 hours from the time you have your last food till the time you go to bed to give yourself the best night's sleep possible. That make sure your growth hormone gets released. Make sure that your liver and your gallbladder, and they do all their detox stuff overnight, that your ghrelin and leptin stay balanced. I call it the hormones that dance in your sleep. There's all this whole symphony of hormones that are acting. And if you throw it off by eating the last meal right before you go to bed, having a bowl of ice cream or the chips on the couch and the glass of wine, you're throwing off your sleep. And that's going to throw off your mental stability the next day, your insulin sensitivities, your cortisol levels, everything, all your hormones. So that's an important piece. So fasting, I think if you want to start to extend that window beyond 12 hours, that's when we get into what is currently called intermittent fasting. I've been teaching people in my Sweet Spot program how to do that for 2011, 14 years, 13 years, right? So we've been talking about this for a long time, but nobody was talking about it then, right? So it was a private thing between me and my members, but now everybody's talking about intermittent fasting. So a lot of people are on like 16-8. Okay, 16 hours of fasting, 8 hours of eating. That may not be possible for some people. You may not be able to go that length, especially people who have high metabolic rates and they're really skinny and they need more calories. It's really hard to get it all in an 8-hour window without stuffing yourself, right? So you have to figure out, is fasting good for you? And what's your ideal fasting window? So I always tell people, just get to the 12-12, just get there. Because that's what everybody really should be doing. There's rare situations where that's not going to work. And then from there, if you feel like you want to extend your window a little bit, your fasting window a little bit longer, the advantage is we get into something called autophagy. When we've been in the fasted state for, some people say 15 hours, some people say 18 hours. Nobody knows for sure, somewhere in that range. But we get into this state where the body starts like eating away damaged tissue. Autophagy is a great state to be in. So we can do that on a daily basis. We can do that 3 days a week. Women need to be careful about where they are in their menstrual cycle because it can throw off their luteinizing hormone and it can affect their periods and it affect their fertility. So we don't want to mess with that too much, but a few days a week of doing this can be super helpful for folks, right? And there's authors out there that talk about it very specifically at specific times of the month. I mean, you can do all that. I work a lot with postmenopausal women, so it don't matter. We're all the same, always the same. But that's important. There's other kinds of fasting, though. There's extended fasting. People think extended long fast, 3 days. Well, that's not exactly a long fast, but 3 to 5 days is more of an extended fast that a lot of people can safely do at home, but I usually recommend that they work with a practitioner who's going to help them to monitor their blood sugar, monitor their electrolytes, and be cognizant. But I've had people do 3 to 5 day fasts, in my groups and with miraculous results, amazing results, right? So you can do that, but that's not for everybody. It takes fortitude to get through the first day because there's a lot of psychological driving, like, I'm just going to finish that whatever it is in the refrigerator, and then I'll start tomorrow. And there's always a reason to do that. But then that gets into a physical state. Once you get into that second and third day, physiologically, you're going into detox modes for most people. So it gets uncomfortable. Once you get to day 4 and 5, for most people, it's like, ooh, this is really cool. I really feel good. But most people don't have the fortitude to make it that far, right? And you don't have to. But having, I think, some sort of fasting regime that you do on a regular basis, whether it means one day a week you do a 16-8, that's fine. But one of the things that I developed based on the work of Dr. Valter Longo, who's a longevity researcher, and he came up with this concept of fasting mimicking diets.
Mm-hmm.
And you can actually eat in such a way that it mimics the effects of fasting. Is it 100%? No, but it mimics. So I took his research and I looked at what his macronutrient ratios were, and I created a 5-day plan, a 5-day program where you eat every day. You start out with like 1,100 calories, maybe 40% of what you normally would eat or 50% of what you normally eat. And then it goes down from there. And it's whole foods. It's all plant-based because that's what the research showed. And people are feeling full. They even say to me, I can't eat all the food on the menu plan. It's too much for me. Do I have to? I'm like, no, you can eat less. You just can't eat more, right? Because they're feeling so full and satiated. And then we have people by day 5 whose fasting and glucoses are perfect. And if they test insulin, then the fasting insulins are good. And then their ketones are in a really great place. And they're like mental clarity, they're losing weight. That's something you can actually do once a month.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what his research showed. And maybe you just do that for the first 3 or 4 months, and then you spread it out and just do it a few times a year to get the benefits of fasting without actually fasting. And your insulin levels normalize, your blood sugar levels normalize, blood pressure normalizes. It's a phenomenal process. I've taken hundreds of people through with amazing success.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of fasting as well. And I know it like you, it doesn't work for everyone. There's no perfect regimen. There's no perfect schedule. I think the thing that we really have to be mindful of is how we break the fast.
Oh, yeah.
What you do at the end of the fast when you start eating again makes all the difference. That's actually more important than how long you fasted for.
Exactly.
So definitely don't fast so that you can binge. Don't
No.
fast as a punishment because of something you already ate. Like, we really have to approach it with the right mindset, with the right healing attitude,
Right.
with the right intentions, and then come out of it the right way too. Or you not only undo all the benefits you just got, but you actually set yourself back even farther. And it can actually be really dangerous if you come out of it the wrong way. So I don't know if you have any thoughts on, like, what do you recommend for people, even after just like 16-8, but especially after a longer fast?
Yeah, 16-8, it's not as critical, but I think that the first meal, I like to have the first meal be nutrient dense. Nutrient dense and easy to digest, especially 16-8, not so much, but I mean, that's how I eat anyway, is a salad, vegetables. If you're doing it 16-8 every day, then you just have to get into what's a good meal for me to maintain my weight or, continue my health goals. But for a longer fast, if you haven't put food into your body for 3 to 5 days and you sit down and eat pizza, your body's going to revolt. It's going to revolt. So my typical, if I do, one year I did, 2019, I did every 6 weeks, I did a 5-day fast. And I wanted it. I kept wanting it. And then towards the end, I spread it out a little more. And then by the next year, it's like, no, my body doesn't want to do it quite so often. Right. But it was for whatever reason, my body needed it, wanted it then. But I always broke it with something easy. Now, personally, I digest fats really well. So I would have a half an avocado blended in the blender with a cucumber. And I would look forward to it because it was so yummy and delicious. Right. But something like that. Maybe it is just a juice. Maybe it's a light smoothie, not like with 5 pounds of kale and broccoli in it, because it's going to be hard on your system, not too much fiber. And you break it that way. I don't recommend breaking it with animal products because those are harder to digest. And a lot of people put it out there that they do. So maybe it works for some people. Doesn't work for me, doesn't work for other people I've worked with. But easy to digest foods that are nutrient dense. Probiotic rich foods. That's another thing I often break it with is coconut yogurt, right? Something like that. I don't usually break it with fruit because I don't want to jump my blood sugar up too much, but veggies, low glycemic veggies, really, potent, but easy to digest ones, not like a big plate of, raw broccoli. No,
Yeah.
even cooked
Yeah.
broccoli could be problematic. So it's very easy to digest, depending on where you're at. Maybe a blended soup is good, especially if it's the winter, right? And you get colder when you're fasting, and to steam up a bunch of veggies, put them in the blender with the water, the broth, and blend that up and season it. That's a great way to break a fast, and you take it to your capacity, because the tendency is to I'm going to eat ton. My trick is if I'm doing an extended fast, I fast until my dinner meal, whether it's 4, 5, 6 o'clock. I break it with that one meal, with the idea that I'm just going to do one meal. Because if I start early, then it triggers oh, I'm hungry again. Oh, I'm hungry again. I haven't eaten in 5 days. I'm going to eat more. And then you go, oh no, why did I do that? So that's my approach.
Yeah, I think I've found much of the exact same, that definitely go slow, definitely pick easy to digest options, at least for the very first food you put in your mouth.
Oh, yeah.
So a broth, a soup, a light smoothie, a yogurt, those kinds of things I think are a great way. Avocado is a great, simple way. And maybe like an hour later, you're a little bit hungry again and you can have more of a regular meal. Still don't go for the pizza, still don't go for the junk foods, but you can maybe have a more full meal with more of the animal proteins or things that are a little bit harder to digest, because you've kind of primed the system already. You just don't want to start with something really heavy or hard to digest. I think that easier way back in after an extended fast is much more advised, for sure.
Yeah, for sure. For sure.
So thank you so much for sharing all of this amazing information. We could probably talk all day, because I know you have even more amazing information for everyone. I know you also have your own podcast, but I just want to give you the opportunity to share where people can learn more about you and all of the amazing things you're doing.
Yeah, absolutely. So my podcast is Reinvent Healthcare. It's geared towards health practitioners and geeky, people who want information for their own health, who aren't afraid of the science, because we get scientific in there. Reinventhealthcare.com, but it's on, iTunes and Spotify and all those places. I have a blog, and every week we put up a new recipe. We've been very consistent for the last 3 years of putting up a new recipe every week. And the recipes coming from my books, from my programs and stuff like that. And we usually put up an article as well. And then, so that's at drritamarie.com/blog. So if you just go to drritamarie.com, you can click on blog. And I'm on Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, lots of YouTube videos out there, probably, a few hundred YouTube videos out there. Where else? Yeah. And I have a couple of freebies that I can offer you guys if you're interested in going deeper with some of the stuff we talked about. And I'll give you the link that you can put with this, but the hormone hacking break your fast menus, right? And that's whether you're going 16-8, whether you're going 12-12, whether you've done a 5-day fast. It's a great way to start to prime your system for good hormonal balance. And then I have a really nice kind of infographic-y type handout of foods that improve insulin sensitivity. So both of those are there.
Love it. Yeah, we will absolutely link all of that information up in the show notes, so people can just click really easily and get to all of your things. So thank you so much for all of the amazing insights that you shared today, from insulin resistance and hormone health in general, and fasting and lifestyle, and just so many amazing topics that we've covered today. So thank you.
Thank you.
To everyone out there, we'll catch you again on future episodes.